So if we run this code as it is, it still won't work. Let's say that we want to look at the rec object, because that's where our user is going to be attached to. So let's say that we wanted to look at this, and so let's save our code. And let's see here. Wait for it to restart. And we can run Postman now, and we'll let it go through its thing. All right, so we know that match is true. It's going to return done null user for us. And then we might ask ourselves, okay, so we're going to see it console.log rec, right? Except, well, what happened? Nothing happened. Why didn't it console.log rec? The issue is that Passport is defaulted to be set up with sessions, which we will do in a second. But on the off chance that you don't want to use sessions, if we go here, so we have to actually disable them. So by default, sessions is going to be enabled, and right now we don't have express sessions, or we don't have Passport sessions actually enabled here. So what we want to do is we want to add this line of code, sessions false, to our passport.authenticate route. So right here after local, we'll add that. And if we save it now and let it rerun, and now we go into Postman and we click send. As soon as we can actually get a response. Okay, so match is going to be equal to true. And real quick, let's go. Okay, so I have a breakpoint set up there. So now we see we have this rec object, and if we go all the way down to the bottom, we have a user object that's been attached to this rec. I can't seem to open it up. Let's go into the console, and we'll just say let's look at rec.user. All right, so we have a model, and we have all these data values, and we see that these are the data values for this particular person. Okay, so we are good to go. This person has been authenticated. So what we'll need to do next is I'm just going to return this user to, so we can say res.status 200.json user is equal to rec.user. So we can just return this user back to this route. So we'll click save. Go to Postman. Run through this again. Okay, and then if we go back to Postman, we see that a user has been returned to us. So the reason that we don't have sessions, the reason that we don't have a cookie being sent back to us is because in our code we disabled sessions. We said sessions are false. So I don't want to send a username and a password with every single request, because that would be just an inordinate amount of. I can't imagine asking a user to consistently submit their username and their password unless I were creating like an open API that the public needed to access. We are not doing that. So although this is an API that can be accessed by the public, its primary purpose is for it to be accessed by the browser in a headless React type situation. So we're not going to use sessions false because we are going to use sessions. Now, Passport is a little bit, they're not great at explaining this. So you might have noticed in their documentation that you see these two things. So you see Passport session and Express session being used here. And you need both, but unfortunately, they never actually tell you that you need Express session, and they don't tell you how to set it up at all. All they really tell you is that this is what you need to do in your passport.js file. And even this is a little bit fuzzy. So let's go through how you actually set up sessions. The first thing we need to do is go to npm and find a package called Express Sessions. So Express. And obviously, since this isn't maintained by Passport, it shouldn't really be up to them to explain how it works. But I feel like they kind of should tell you at least where to start looking for things. Unfortunately, they don't. So let's go and install this real quickly. That way we don't have to do it later. So npm I -- save express session. All right, so what is Express Session going to do? Well, there's a lot of different things it can do. So I would tell you, you have to look through the documentation itself. But what we're going to do is we're going to have it set up a session database table. So we're going to have it connect to our database and set up an actual session database table. And then we're going to basically do something along the lines of this. Let me show you real quickly how I would set this up, and maybe that will make more sense. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to add a secret, or not a secret, but what do they call it? Maybe they do call it a secret. Yeah, they call it a secret. So the first thing we need to do is add a secret, and you might think that I would add this secret to app.js, but remember, this is a secret that we would treat like a password. So we don't really want this being pushed to GitHub at all. So I'm going to add it to my env file, actually. So let's say session secret equals, and I'm just going to put in some text. So let's just put in some text there. It can be some random text. Doesn't have to be anything special. And then in our config file, we now need to include this. So let's say const session underscore secret equals process.env.session secret. And then let's export this outside of the DB object because it's not in part of our DB. So session secret. All right, so now we're going to have access to that if we export this config model or config file. And remember way earlier before when I said that we should probably call this config file somewhere else besides the models.index file? Well, that's what we're going to do now. So at the top of our app.js file, let's import our config. So const config equals require, and we'll go into config and config.js. Okay, So that's going to give us this config object, and now we can actually set up express sessions. So before passport authentication, let's include a section now that says session setup. Okay, and now that we've installed express session, we're going to use it. So here we see that we need to, I'm just going to copy this, all of this, and go back into here and paste that. So first we're setting trust proxy to 1, okay? And then we're actually using our session. So first, let's actually require sessions. So we'll say const session equals require express session. Okay, so we're going to, now our secret is going to be not keyboard cat, but config dot session secret. And if I can spell, secret. Okay. Yep, so we have config. So that'll be session secret. Resave equals false. And you can look up what all of these mean. Save uninitialized equals true. Cookie secure equals true. I also want to set a max life of the cookie. So let's see here. We'll say expires. Oh. All right, so let's change some of these up. Resave equals false. That's good. Save uninitialized. I also want that to be false. And cookie secure true. False. Okay, you can look up what some of these mean. The only one I'm going to be a little bit... So this is a little controversial because Express Session actually does recommend that you set this to true. However, you also have to make sure that you have HTTPS enabled on your server, on your website. Otherwise, you're going to screw some things up. So I actually say set this to false. That way you don't have to worry about HTTPS just quite yet. Because basically what this means is that if you, so Express Session is probably going to do a better job at explaining it. Find secure. Okay, so basically what this means is that if a browser doesn't have an HTTPS connection, then the cookie is not going to be sent. And I mean, you know, I guess that's okay, but I want the cookie to be sent whether or not there's an HTTPS connection at all. And then we're going to change this. So let's give it an expiration. So we'll say max age. Max age. I think it's max age like that. Let's look just to make sure. So max age, find me max age. Okay. Yes, it is max age. So this is going to be set in milliseconds. So what I would suggest doing is don't try and calculate milliseconds. Ugh, that sounds horrible. Instead, let's just do some math. So if we have 1,000 milliseconds, right? So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. And then we want to say times, let's say 60. So that's 1 minute times another 60 is 1 hour times 24 is 1 day times 365 is 1 year, and you get it. So this would be the equivalent of saying, let this cookie expire in 1 year. And for most websites nowadays, cookies last a really long time. If I log into a website, I pretty much expect me not to have to log in for a very long time. So this is the equivalent of 1 year. Now, the fun part, we need to set up a store. If you've never heard of the concept of a store, and you don't necessarily need to use a store, but if you've never heard of the concept of a store is basically where all of your sessions are going to be kept. And to do that, let's look at the Express session docs. If we go way to the bottom, it's going to talk about session store implementation. And you really got to follow their directions on how to set this up. I believe they give you recommendations on different stores that you can use. So let's find the one that we'll be using. We will use this one. So Express MySQL session. Okay, and we can open that up. All right, so this is what we're going to need to do. So we'll install that. That's npm install express mysql session -- save. And that's going to install everything. And then we can see here, so first, we obviously have to have express session, which we do. And then we're going to include this MySQL store by calling this line. Okay, so we'll say copy that. And we'll go to the top of our app.js file and include that right underneath session. So that's going to give us access to this MySQL store. Don't forget to call it a const. Then we need to set up the options for this store. So the options are going to be the database that it connects to. So we're going to copy all of this right here. And this is going to tell the MySQL store connect to this database and create a store table in this particular database. Okay, so we can include this right underneath this invocation. And we can actually include a comment that says MySQL store setup. Now for options, obviously we need to use the same options that we used in the config file. So host is going to be config.host, right? I believe that's it. So let's look at our config file. We have username, password, database, and host. Okay, so port 3306. User is the same as username. So we'll say config.username. Password is config.password. And database is config.database. So that's going to set that up. Let's make these consts. All right, so now we have a session store that's been invoked here. And if we look at the documentation, we see that we need to include this store phrase in our app.use session. So back in our file, we'll go down to our session setup and we'll include a store equals MySQL store, just like that. Okay, so now that we've set that up, not MySQL store, sorry, session store. Okay, so now that we have set that up, we should be good to go. There was a lot of jumping around there, so I 100% expect that we probably forgot to do something, but we'll see if we get any errors thrown at us. So let's walk through this real quickly to make sure that everything was set up correctly. So we have our config object, our session object, and our session MySQL store object. We're going to set up our MySQL store with the options variable and pass that in to our MySQL store function, which will return a session store. In our session setup, we said app.set trust proxy1, and we said app.use session. So then we're going to set our secret to our config.secret or session secret. We're not going to resave. So we did all of these, and we're setting our cookie to be false, so it doesn't require HTTPS, and its max age will be, or its expiration will be set to 1 year from now. We're going to then initialize passport, require in the passport file, and reuse our auth route. Our auth route will then make a call to passport.authenticate, which will call passport.js local strategy. We will find a user based on the username and password that was provided in the body of the post request, which will then return to us a user. We will decrypt their password, and if it's a match, we will return done null user. If it's not a match, we return done null false. In auth routes, we still have this res.status200 JSON user rec.user. All right, so let's save everything and see if we got it all wired up correctly. So we'll click send. Wait for this to do its thing. Okay. Send again. All right, match equals true. Oop, I have it. Hold on. Okay, I have a feeling that we did something incorrectly. Let's look at auth routes. Let's refresh this. It is possible that this isn't going to create our table for us. All right, is it going to give us an error at least to tell us what we did incorrectly? No, that would be too easy. All right, let's debug this and see why we didn't get a request back, or response back. Okay, so figured out why we are not this isn't working for us. In the same way that we have to disable sessions, we actually also have to enable them. So if you go into the passport documentation, we will get to this in a second. Ooh, oh my gosh. We will get to this in a sec. I can't even. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. But for some reason, and I don't understand why this is exactly, but you would think that if you have to enable passport or disable passport sessions because they're enabled by default, you would think that this would just be included, but it's not. So we need to use app.use passport.session right underneath app.use passport initialize. Okay? And then while we're at it, because I did forget, we need to do these two things. So we need to serialize a user and deserialize a user. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the cookie. So when we initially log in, Passport is going to send us a cookie back. And whenever we log in again, instead of us sending a username and a password, we're going to send that cookie. Serialize and deserialize is how Passport takes that cookie and turns it into something usable that can be used to actually authenticate a user. So I'm going to copy both of these just as they are, and in my passport file, we will go above the passport.use but below the require user, and we will put this in here. So let's actually go through what this does. So when we have serialize user, this is going to take a user into it, and it's going to call done with the user ID. And then when we have deserialize user, this takes an ID into it, and it's going to find user.find by ID. So we obviously don't want to do this because we don't have this, right? So let's actually do this. So we're going to say user dot user search, and then we're going to pass in that ID dot then. This is going to pass a user back to us, and then we'll call done error comma user, and then we can delete this. And when we get this all up and running, I will show you how information is flowing between these two. But let's check this out and see if it works. Okay, so we'll go to here and we'll click play, and I'm going to put 2 breakpoints in. So let's find our passport file. Actually, it's right up here. And I want to add a breakpoint to line 8 and a breakpoint to line 12 so that I can see what's happening. Okay, why can't I get rid of that? Go away. Delete this breakpoint. Delete. Remove. Okay. And we're good here. I trust that all of this stuff is happening correctly at this point. So let's go ahead and try to log in. Send. All right, so here we have a user, right? So we have passport.serialize is being passed a user, and it's going to say user.id. So this is how it creates the cookie that we're going to be sending. So let's click play. And now we have a res.status. Let's let this just kind of, why can I not deactivate my breakpoints? All right, let's just let this play through. And we see that we got a user back. Yay! Now, let's see here. Again, how do I find cookies? Now, according to this, it did not send a cookie. That's interesting. All right, after a little bit of figuring out what the heck is going on, I see that I set up the app.js file incorrectly. So if we go to app.js, when we initialize the MySQL store, all of these config things should have db in front of them. So .db.username, .host.password, and such. So now if we click save, we should be able to connect to the MySQL to the database and create our MySQL store. So we'll click play, and then it'll hit this. So options should now actually be, I don't know why it's disappearing for me. So options is equal to an object password. Okay, so everything is set correctly. We can play through that. If we refresh this, we should now see a MySQL store sessions. All right, so here we have a session. So then let's attempt to log in. Okay, we're going to do that. And I don't think I have it set on the return anymore. So, still no cookies were sent. Was a session actually established? Let's look at our session. All right, so we do see that a session was established, but for some reason I'm not getting a cookie back, which I kind of don't believe anymore at this point. I think it's lying. Okay, guys, I'm back because I had to try and figure out how on earth I'm not getting a cookie back. It turns out I am getting a cookie back, and for some reason, Postman is just being dumb and not saying that I have a cookie. Uh, so here we can see that a fudge. Yeah, here we can. Here we can see that a cookie is in fact being sent back with our request if we log in. Now, a couple things I want to do because I noticed some things while I was debugging that are incorrect. First and foremost, well, actually, I think it was the only thing I noticed, is when we're looking at these serialize and deserialize functions. Notice here that before, I believe I had this set to error user, and this is kind of just what happens when you copy paste code. As you can tell, there is no error variable for this to actually do anything with. So I'm going to set this to null user, and because we do want to make sure that we're passing in a null we want to pass in something for the first argument. It's expecting something, and if it's true, it's going to think it's an error, so we want to pass in null. So now that this is actually working, let's look at how the serialize user and deserialize user actually work, and we'll run through this whole entire flow real quickly here. So because I do have a session, let's delete these two sessions here. All right. That way we can see it start from the beginning. And then in this, once it actually restarts, or maybe it doesn't need to. Does it? Does it? No? Yes? Okay. So we can still use Postman. We can use Insomnia. This is, by the way, I downloaded another HTTP client called Insomnia. And I may start moving forward with this in the future instead of using Postman, because Postman seems to be glitching. But nonetheless, if we continued using Postman for this and we send through this request, we're going to see it hit serialize user. And this is where it's actually creating that cookie for us. So it's taking this user object that we found, and obviously the only way it could have this user object if it's being called after all of this. So passport.use, the local strategy has run. It called return done null user, and this user object is now being passed into this function. And it's going to create this cookie based off of the user ID for this person, which is, if it'll actually tell me, this. All right, so we hit play, and it'll send us back a response. For some reason, it says we don't have a cookie, but we actually do. Now, if I hit send again, we're going to see something different happen. So this time, it didn't call passport serialize user. Instead, it called passport.deserialize user. And you might be saying, well, how? Well, when we sent this second response through, we had a cookie. So before it even looks at passport.use local strategy or anything, it's going to try to authenticate us. And to do that, it's going to look at that cookie, and we have an ID here that's being passed with the cookie, and it's going to try and deserialize it. So it's going to take this ID, and it's going to we're going to perform a user search based on that ID, and if or when that finishes, if we find a user, we're going to say return said user. And only then will we actually see it hit serialize user because it's trying to go through the authorization again. But had this been any other route that didn't try to go through authorization, we would have effectively been authenticated. Okay, so now we actually have user authentication set up. And if I look in my database now, I will see that I have a session right here that I can either delete or continue to allow to exist. This is one thing that I really think sessions improve on over, let's say, JSON Web Tokens, is that with a JWT, it's stateless, so as long as that person has that JSON Web Token, they have access. But one thing you'll find that's really great about sessions is that, let's say that someone has a service that they're subscribing to, and we gave them a cookie that lasts a year. Well, now they have a cookie that lasts a year, and there's no way for us, or we have a JSON Web Token that lasts a year, there's no way for us to invalidate that. As long as they have it, we can't really stop them from logging in. So as long as they never log out and get rid of that JSON Web Token on their browser, then they have access. Whereas this, even if they have this cookie, so even though my browser has this cookie, if I delete this session, like you just seen a couple minutes ago, in my database, it doesn't matter if they have a cookie. They're still going to be required to re-authenticate themselves. So this handles authentication. This is a way for us to log in. If we look at here, we will see that there is just one thing that we haven't gone over yet, and that is the step where we say, is this person already logged in? Now, remember I said if I have someone who's already logged in and they try and log in again, I want to delete the cookie they have. That way, if you log in, let's say that your cookie is set to a much lower expiration date than mine is. So maybe your cookie only lasts for like an hour or a day. If that's the case and they log in 2 minutes before that cookie is set to expire and it's not renewed, they're not sent back a new cookie, basically, 2 minutes later, they're going to be required to log in again. And we don't want to do that. So remember here, we said that if a user is already logged in, then we want to destroy that session and then re-invoke passport authentication. How do we do this? So the way that we do this is if we open this up and we go into our auth routes, we want to actually add another piece of middleware right before passport.authenticate. So let's add a rec res next call here. Okay, and in this we want to ask, is this person authenticated? So remember that Passport gives us access to a method that's called isAuthenticated. And the rec object or the request object is what we are actually going to use that against. So we'll say if rec.isAuthenticated, then we want to do something. So we'll say rec dot, and this is just stuff you kind of have to read the documentation to figure out, but it's log out. Okay, so first we want to call rec.logout, and then next we would want to call rec.session.destroy. So what that's going to do is reach in to the database and destroy the current session that they have. And then finally, if we look in Insomnia here, so you may have noticed this in Insomnia we have this connect.sid. And this is what the actual browser is going to store. So this is the cookie that the browser is storing. And we want to tell the browser to get rid of this cookie, to tell it that it's no longer valid. Because if we let the browser keep this cookie, then it's going to keep trying to send this cookie. And that means it's going to hit the Deserialize. And Deserialize is going to say, no, you don't exist. You don't have permission to do this. So we need to tell the browser in some way to delete this cookie. And the way we do that is on the res object. So we'll say res dot clear cookie. And then we need to give this a string which tells it to what to clear. And we're going to say connect.sid. Because if we look in Insomnia, we see that the name of this cookie is called connect.sid. So when this response goes back, that's us essentially telling the browser, delete this cookie. It is no longer valid. You shouldn't keep it anymore. Okay, so first we're logging them out. Next, we're saying destroy their session. And then we're saying clear their cookie. So if I'm already logged in, I will not be logged in again. Or if I'm already logged in, I will be logged in again instead of just passing straight through. Okay, and let's go ahead and click play. We'll let this all run. And I want to show you what will happen now if I try to log in twice. Okay, so let's use Insomnia because I'm actually starting to like this a little bit. It's the black layout. I like the black layout. So Control Enter. We'll send this through. It's possible that I sent it through too early. Is there an error? Nope, no error. But we didn't hit anything. All right, let's cancel. Send again. Let's make sure that this is working. Let's add a breakpoint there. Well, this is interesting. Well, while I'm at it and looking at it, I do see here that we did forget to add next. So let's definitely remember to invoke next, because otherwise we'd be screwed. And that needs to be invoked outside of this next or this if statement. So let's hit save and see what the heck is going on. All right, play. Make sure we wait until this actually runs. Live edit failed, connection is closed. I don't know what the heck that means. All right, and resend this request. Error, could not connect to server. What is going on here? All right, let's use Postman, I guess. We're just switching between a whole bunch of clients. All right, so we're at Deserialize user. Way too much stuff happening here. All right, so it said that we had a cookie, and now we're going to go to rec.logout. Okay, and then here, this is interesting to look at this because we can. So if we look at rec.session, What is going on? Okay, session. Not secret. Session. Oh my God. All right, so if we look at session, we see that we have a cookie. We have passport, which is, this is basically, this is the ID. So we have user, then we have this ID. Okay, so we have all of this stuff. Now watch what happens when we do. So we're going to wait for it to go down to res.clearCookie. Now if we go back to the console and we do rec.session again, we see that it's undefined. So the session has been destroyed, and next, okay, it'll call this. I'm going to get rid of all of these. Let's just get rid of all of my breakpoints because I trust that everything works. All right, so hit play, and that should send us back. Well, yeah, it did send us a response, but Postman was like, dude, you waited too long. So let's use Insomnia to actually see what happens. All right, so we see that we get a cookie, and if you can just remember some of this, so let's just copy this real quickly. Now, if we try to run this again, it might be really obvious. Did it not return? What's going on here? Okay. So let's paste this here and see. So here we can see it right there. This says S%3AS and this says S%3AU. So this is a different cookie than the one we had before. Our cookie was destroyed, cleared, whatever, and a new cookie was created. If we look in here as well, okay, we can't actually see that it. So when it destroys a session, it must also remove the entry from the database. So we can't see that. But the main point is, oh, this is going on over an hour. I'm so sorry, guys. I just keep talking and talking. The main point is we have our cookie. This whole process now has actually been set up so a user can log in or log out. And in the next video, we will talk about how we will block off different API access routes so that only certain users can do certain things. I will see you there. If you are still with me, thank you for hanging around. Bye.
You said that you needed me like a car.